Order, order. Can I welcome everybody warmly to this meeting of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, and particularly welcome Anthony Arter, the Pensions Ombudsman. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
And we've got lots of questions to ask you. So I'm going to start, if I may, with the first of them. You recently made an important determination on the Norton motorcycle pension schemes. Now, there may be an appeal on that, so we should obviously stick with generalities for this morning. But I wonder whether you could tell us how much you work with the pensions regulator on a case like that, and are there any other bodies involved in looking at a case of that kind?
Well, I didn't work with the regulator in respect of that because we have a framework agreement in place, and obviously respect the constrictions, if you like, of the way in which they operate and the way in which we operate, and we have to be careful with the information that they provide to us and we provide to them because of those restrictions. So I was aware, of course, that there was an inquiry going on by the regulator, and prior to that, I had actually made a determination myself before the regulator became involved, because I had a complaint regarding a transfer that had been refused or hadn't been dealt with, and I made a determination that transfer should take place. Nothing happened. As a result of that, I made another determination for another member, the same thing, refusal of a transfer. And I then realized that actually there was much more going on with the way in which the three schemes were operating. And I really wanted to have an oral hearing and to listen to the trustee and to understand where the monies were going and what was occurring here. And so that was around the same time that the regulator actually appointed an independent trustee at the invitation of the single trustee, Mr. Garner. And as a result of that, the assets were frozen. The scheme assets were frozen. That was all in public, it was in the public domain. I knew about that. And I decided that I would go ahead with taking a different approach so that I could, in fact, if I decided and determined this way, that I would, in fact, give the monies back or instruct and determine the respondent to pay all the monies back personally to the members. It was a new way for me to deal with this type of issue, in that I only had 31 complaints, 31 members, 300 odd members, and I really wanted to be in a position to restore the funds to those members. You'll appreciate it's a complicated case, and as a result of the approach I took, we brought the independent trustee Del Riada in as a complainant so that I could direct in my determination that all members are recompensed by the respondent.
Right. If people are victims of a scam with a defined benefit pension scheme, generally, should they come to you or to the pensions regulator? How do they know where to go?
Well, I would hope that if someone has been believes they've been scammed or they have been scammed, then they would make a complaint to me. Absolutely. I think it is also worth them informing the regulator, because they take a different approach. They look at the regulations, reach the regulations, and the FSA, of course, in terms of whether there's been an IFA involved or how they were advised. So I think it's quite important. It's complicated, of course, for the public. There's no doubt about that. It's a very complicated scenario. And we are working together with TPR, with the FCA, with the Pension Protection Fund. We're all working together now to see how we can, act more quickly and, given the constraints, the way in which we operate to make it easier for the public and to make sure that the right body is dealing with that issue at that time. And so we are talking about a number, and also we're talking to independent trustees as well. Dariada have about 80% of the cases appointed by, given to them by the regulator. So we're talking to Dariada, but also other independent trustees about where it's appropriate, given the approach I've now taken in the Norton case, for a pensions liberation or a scam, where we can take action in a similar way that we've done in the Norton. So there are a number of those cases that we're looking at the present time.
Okay.
It is resource intensive because in every case I have to have an oral hearing. And that takes, as you can imagine, a lot of my resources in order to do that and time. And as you see from the Norton determination, there's a lot of work goes into that case. There's a lot of issues that have to be addressed.
And a last point on this, typically, how long does it, in a case of this kind, how long does it take for people to get their money back?
Well, in normal cases where I make a determination, actually the vast majority get their money back within 28 days. But in a case such as this, where obviously it's subject to appeal for 28 days, but after that, if it's a company that's been set up, a trustee company, and that has gone into administration, and we're now finding the individual trustee or trustees liable, they can, of course, go bankrupt. The monies have to be traced, and if they refuse to pay, then the normal approach is to I declare a copy of my determination, which is taken to the county court. The county court judge will then enforce that determination. It's not a further hearing. All the county court judge will do is absolutely enforce the determination I've made. That is a process that will take a number of months. And of course, if the individual goes bankrupt, then it could take a long time, and maybe, unfortunately, no monies are there at the end of the day. And that's why it's very sad, actually.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, thank you very much. Chris Stevens.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Arthur. Your term of office expires next year. So I think my first question to you is, do you believe your successor will have an easier or harder job than the one you started at the start of your term? And what do you believe the biggest challenge is going to be?
Well, I hope that I've done enough in my 5 years to make it easier for my successor. There will be different challenges, of course. I'd just like to, perhaps it might be worth me just explaining the changes that have been made and where we are today compared to how the Ombudsman Service operated 5 years ago. 5 years ago, there was a massive backlog of cases that was building daily. As I took over in May 2015, it was really concerning. There was all the senior people left at the same time. The Ombudsman, the Deputy Ombudsman, and the Casework Director. So there was no hierarchy of experience from the past, and so also the whole system was predicated on what had been set up by Parliament in the 80s. Was in fact for determination go through a proper procedure. The Ombudsman make a determination, and there's a lot of administration and process involved in that, and that's time consuming. And in addition to that, of course, we had the Pensions Advisory Service at that time running a separate system of investigation of disputes, informal. That was set up as a charity. Sorry, I was set up in the 90s, not the 80s. The Pensions Advisory Service was set up in the 80s. And it wasn't changed when the Ombudsman Service came into being. As a result of that, you had a two-tier process. The public could either go, and this is where it was confusing for the public, they can either go to the Pensions Advisory Service to see if they get the dispute resolved, or they could come straight to the Ombudsman. And so there was a decision to be made where people don't understand pensions in the first place, for those to make. And I thought it was very muddled. And also, if they went to the Pensions Advisory Service and their dispute wasn't, it then came to the Ombudsman and started all over again. So you've lost a year or more actually going through a process when you start the whole process again, going through a second body. Again, a complete waste of time, stressful for the individuals, difficult and costly for the respondents. So for me, when I arrived, I wanted to do a number of things. First of all, change the process so that you had a much faster process. And I brought in informal resolution. Rather than with consent on both sides, provided that could be resolved in a reasonable space of time, that was obviously the way to go, and much, much quicker. And I had an experienced body of people. They were called investigators. I changed their name to adjudicators. They adjudicated and issued an opinion of what they felt the Ombudsman would decide. And that works really well. Today, 95% of all disputes are dealt with by informal process. It's reduced the time from when I took over. It was over 10 months. The average time for a new complaint, 10 months. It's now 5.3 months. And actually going through the early resolution team, which was the old TPAS team, that takes 3.9 months. So actually the timescale has really reduced, and it's far better for the public. The second thing I did was I also started building relationships with the stakeholders, with the pensions industry, with the big public sector schemes, with the unions, with the big private sector schemes, and started talking to them about how they could resolve their complaints, what I would decide, and why it was a waste of time actually not dealing with those complaints properly. Because if they didn't deal with the complaints properly, it would come to me and I would find them as a result guilty of whatever they've done, but also they have the publicity of that. The relationship with their members is much poorer. It costs them more money as a result of going through a big process, and it's much better for all concerned, including especially their members, actually to deal with it in the first stage. And I also tried to persuade them to reduce their two-stage internal dispute resolution process, which the legislation allows to be reduced to one stage. That saves another 6 to 12 months of time in actually going through a process. And again, I think we all know how stressful it is when you've got a problem and you've got to ring the body where you're having a problem with, and it goes on and on for months and months and months. It just builds up, and actually people get very intransigent as a result. Far better to deal with that in a quicker process. And several of those schemes today have changed. The Armed Forces scheme, for example, is a one-stage process and not two. And there are so many other schemes that have done that as a result of me really pushing to actually reduce this timescale for the resolution of a complaint. So they're the changes, just very quickly, they're the changes that I brought in. I also wrote to the Pensions Minister within a couple of months of me being in post, requesting that the TPAS resolution team transfers to me so that we didn't have this dual process, simpler for the public. The 2014 triennial review, which was the previous review before the Taylor review in 2019, said that what was a priority was to simplify the customer journey. The customer journey is still a little bit of a mess. It was a worse mess then because you had three bodies dealing with pensions. You had the Pensions Advisory Service, you had the Pensions Ombudsman, and you had the Financial Ombudsman Service. Really complicated scenario for a member of the public or anyone to get a resolution of a complaint dealing with pensions, which is such an important saving for those individuals and such a concern when it's going wrong. So for me, I wanted to try and simplify the process, at least part of it, by bringing in the TPAS team. That was agreed by Richard Harrington, the minister at the time, and then in 2018 they transferred to my office. I then had to set up a new process to accommodate that. But what I wanted to do was not change it all there right, because if I'd done that, I didn't have time to work out how it was working and the best way to do it. So I did it in two stages. The first stage in 2018 was to actually have a first contact centre where all the inquiries came in and very simple issues could be dealt with there and then. It then went through a jurisdiction process to see what was in our timescales or whether it was something we should investigate or someone else. And it would then go to either the early resolution team, which is the old TPAS team, or to my adjudication team. That was the way I set it up in 2018. I've just gone through the second phase, because the problem with that, I was very happy with the way we worked, the way we dealt with that, because it allowed the TPAS team just to move across and carry on as they were and relax in the new environment. The second phase, though, is really important, which is the phase we've just implemented, because we are triaging in several places. And that is not a good use of resources. We were triaging when the complaint came in, triaging in the jurisdiction process, and triaging by the early resolution team, having their complaints coming straight to them and others going to the adjudication team. I hope this is not too complicated.
No, it's not complicated. I mean, I think, essentially, what you're suggesting to the committee is that one of the improvements that your successor is going to take on is simplification of processes and around handling complaints then, Mr. Arthur. So looking at your corporate plan, you've placed a strong emphasis on people development. So has developing internal candidates for promotion and potentially looking at internal candidates to take over your role, has that been a priority for you?
It is a priority, because one of the shame about the size of my organisation is it's quite limited in the opportunity you can give. And so we're looking at this second phase of reorganisation, we've tried to work out ways in which people can get training in different parts of our business, whether it be in the first contact team, whether it be part of the jurisdiction team, or assessment as it now is, or adjudication. And we've offered that opportunity, and also we've created team leaders in a sort of mini hierarchy, if you like. I don't like the word hierarchy, because I believe everyone has an important part to play in the organisation, but different levels in which those individuals can get experience in some management if they wish. But we've also, because some people don't want to deal with management, I don't blame them really, but some people don't want to deal with management, they actually want to deal with the technical side. So we've offered different layers for technical expertise, and they can progress as a result. But it is limited because we are only a small organisation.
So it sounds like one of the challenges your successor may also have is to ensure that if I could use the phrase career ladder, is in place for people to progress, Mr. Arthur. So looking back, I recall you came to us before in the select committee, and you'd said that one of the most challenging questions in your interview was whether it would be correct for a white male to be put forward as a pensions ombudsman. So can I ask you, looking at your development and people development, do you expect when your position is up for people to apply for, do you expect that there would be a diverse range of candidates for your post?
I really hope there will be. One of the things I really enjoyed in joining the Ombudsman service was the complete diversity. It is one of the most diverse groups of people that I've ever worked in. We have all nationalities, all religions, it's just lovely, and they all work so well together, and it's a really good example of how people from different backgrounds can work successfully together as a group. And I have to say, I've said it to the team many times, it is an absolute pleasure working with them. They're dedicated. It doesn't matter what their religion is or where they come from or anything else, and it offers people opportunity. And so for me, I would love to see someone else from a different background taking my role. That would be great. And one of the things that I had, of course, when I took over, I mean, just talking about male, female, I had 3 female directors and me as the male. So I think that was unfair, really. I think there should be a better balance, personally. But no, seriously, I think it's important to give people opportunity at senior level. I really, really do. It's about the best person for the job. That is important, but to give people opportunities to progress.
Well, thanks, Mr. Arthur. Maybe if you could pass on to the committee just the actual stats in terms of the diversification of the workforce. I think that'd be good for us and perhaps a good model for others to adopt. So thank you for your answer to that. So looking ahead at the current period, Mr. Arter, there's been challenges for all of us in how we operate around COVID-19. So can you tell us what challenges that's brought the organisation, but also if there's any changes that have been put in place that you think, well, you know, perhaps that should become the new norm in terms of how we actually conduct our business?
We were very fortunate. I'd like to say it was planning, but it was very fortunate that in 2018, when we moved to the new building for our old one, we hadn't really got sufficient desks for the number of staff. And we made the decision to actually work agilely. It wasn't just a question of space. It was also a question to give people opportunities. So, for example, women with young children or carers or others, it was really important that we changed the whole process. And so we called it agile working. So we gave everyone the equipment in 2018 so that they could work remotely. It's important, though, in doing that, to recognise that a lot of our young members perhaps haven't got the facilities, or they haven't got a room in which they can take a call such as this. You know, they're working in one room, they're sharing a house, they're working on their bed with their laptop on their lap, you know, this sort of thing. And I think we have to bear in mind, not everyone has the opportunities to work remotely in that way. They could go to a library if there's one still open, or they could go somewhere else. But we have to take into account that perhaps the office is the only place they can work. So when I say agilely, it was the employee's choice, whether they came in 5 days a week or whether they actually worked at home or worked in some other environment away from the office. And the only rule was that they have to come into the office 2 days minimum a week. That was the rule. So 3 days they could work somewhere else. And also there's no core hours. So I brought that in 2018. It was a little bit of an experiment. Would our workflow go down? Would people be, you know, as committed? It didn't. And in fact, it helped morale. People really liked it. It did give people, young children and others, opportunities to develop their career and stay in their career. So a real success as far as we're concerned. So when COVID hit in March, we just switched to working 5 days a week at home instead of 3 days a week at home. Everyone had the equipment, and that's including our first contact team. So we didn't have to worry about the only way we could take calls was in the office, as some organizations were really in a difficult position. We were able to switch straight away to our contact team, where they take the initial calls going straight into their own homes. We did decide to, because the number of calls went down considerably in that first period, we decided to stop taking new investigations except where they were urgent. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't know how many of our staff would go sick. We didn't know how many of our staff might be really badly affected by this. So we wanted to make sure that the quality of our work continued as it was. The second thing we also did was tell the respondents and the complainants, the ones we were dealing with at that time, that there may be delays as a result of course, the organizations we were asking for information wouldn't be able to get that information straight away. And also my determinations, they might not be able to be dealt with within that smaller timescale. NHS, for example, I deal with NHS complaints. So we had to take that into account as well. But actually, although the demand went down in the first couple of months, it's almost back to normal now, and we haven't been that badly affected. You ask about what lessons we're learning from this. Well, I still think it's important to have an office where people go to from the point of view of working as a team, exchanging ideas and thoughts, and also for those, as I mentioned earlier, that can't really work at home. And the other aspect that we've really made sure of, our staff are just as important as the customers. It's really important that we look after our staff as well. So we've done all sorts of things. I'm not gonna lie to you, we've had all sorts of competitions and all sorts of things, all team approach to keep the teams together. And bearing in mind that during this whole period, we introduced that whole new way of dealing with casework, and we did all that remotely during this period as well. It's been quite a tough call. So our staff, we really work very hard to understand those that are perhaps vulnerable, those that are being affected mentally because they're isolated. A lot of people, their work is their life. You know, they don't have a big cohort of friends or anything else outside of their office. And so it's very important to understand that and look at it from each individual's perspective and make sure that we have a buddy and team approach right across the office to support those who might be suffering much more than others.
Thanks, Mr. Arthur.
Thank you very much. Debbie Abrahams wants to come in, I think.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. And good morning, Mr. Arthur. My question follows on from Chris's in relation to COVID. So I wonder if you've had a chance to think about the type of pensions issues that we will be facing post-COVID as we enter the recovery. And again, what the implications for that in terms of your workload, the demands on your staff and so on.
Yes, indeed. I'm chair of the Ombudsman Association, and I had a meeting about a month ago with other public sector ombudsmen, and everyone has agreed that the public sector ombudsman will be inundated with complaints as a result of COVID. And I don't think pensions will be any exception to that. If you look at the strain, the financial strain that people are going to be suffering going forward, and they've got a pot of money there in their pension scheme. The big concern is the fraudsters coming in to say, we can help you get that money. You've got perhaps, people under 55 and those fraudsters will be saying, we can help you release that money. And of course they can't, but I can see that happening. I can see an increase, not straight away. These things always, it's delayed action. We probably won't see those complaints coming through maybe for 12 months. Maybe my successor will have that. Maybe less, I don't know. There's no increase right at this moment, but I think that will happen. I think also there will be a lot of small organizations who will turn around to their employees and say, and this is one for the regulator, of course, try and encourage them to opt out of auto-enrollment, but that's a regulatory matter. But I also think there will be those employers who will take the money, the contributions, and I'm already seeing a small increase in those anyway, from small organizations where they're really hard hit financially because of this, and they'll take those contributions and not pay them across into the pension scheme. And so that, I'm convinced that'll happen. Almost certainly. So, in several respects, and then there'll be others who will be perhaps affected by illness or whatever because of all of this, who will make ill health pension claims. They'll increase. So undoubtedly, there will be an increase in the number of complaints.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sir Desmond Swain.
Lists a number of issues and then singularly fails to bite the bullet, telling you only to continue to build your relationship with the financial ombudsman. Why not just amalgamate the two? Comrade, justify your continued separate existence.
I think a bit of history is worth just going through here. The two bodies are very different. So the Financial Ombudsman Service decides a case on fair and reasonable, a subjective decision made by the particular ombudsman or the investigator. We base all my determinations and decisions made on judicial decisions. That's actually quite important, and I think Parliament made the right decision when they brought that in, because pensions is such an important saving for individuals, and also the decisions made can be so costly. If I just mention one I made a couple of months ago, TALIS. TALIS was an RPI CPI case, Retail Prices Index, Consumer Prices Index case, where I decided that the company should be paying Retail Prices Index increases. It cost TALIS £20 million, that decision, but the members had lost 20 million overall, if you look at it the other way around. They appealed and the appeal was dismissed. That decision had to be a judicial decision when you think about it. It can't be just a subjective, fair and reasonable when you're actually deciding that a company is going to pay £20 million in compensation. They have to have the right to challenge that. So Parliament were right that in case of the pensions and in cases of individuals as well, it's important that the decision is legally and judicially based and not just on someone's subjective thoughts on the matter. Also, the Financial Ombudsman Service is limited in the amount of money they can actually award, 350. I might be wrong on this, actually. I can't remember the actual amount. It's been increased. I think it's £350, but I could be wrong on that. It doesn't sound right to me, so don't hold me to that. But they are limited in the amount that they can award. Mine is unlimited. I bind both parties, both the respondent and the complainant. The only way that can be changed is by appeal to the High Court or the Court of Appeal in Northern Ireland or the Court of Sessions in Scotland. That's the only way in which that can be changed. So it's a fundamental difference in approach. To merge the two, you would have to decide whether pensions are now going to be dealt with right across the board. That's all the public service schemes, all these big schemes, they're all going to be dealt with on a subjective basis, or you're going to say to the Financial Ombudsman Service, everything is judicially based. That's a big decision. And they did try and merge the two, going back, I think it was something like 2014, 2013, and it failed because there was no saving and it was too complex in terms of the different jurisdiction and different bases for the two bodies. So I don't agree with that, but what I do think is it should be thought through, and I thought it through right from when I took over, and of course the 2014 triennial evaluation hinted at this anyway, is that when the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000 brought in the power for the Financial Ombudsman Service to actually look at pension complaints, shortly after that, there was a memorandum of understanding agreed between the two bodies that if the complaint dealt with an administrative issue or some problem after the scheme had been set up, the personal pension scheme, don't forget they can only look at personal pensions, not occupational pensions, the personal pension scheme was established, then it would be dealt with by the Pensions Ombudsman. If it was to do with the marketing or the financial advice given, then naturally it would be dealt with by the Financial Ombudsman Service. That was a very sensible memorandum of understanding. It meant that the public then could be told on both websites, both respective FOS and my website, it clearly stated where one should go for the particular type of complaint. It made it simpler for the public. Unfortunately, the Financial Ombudsman Service decided that under their rules, they couldn't split it. So they then drafted a new memorandum of understanding, which I debated and negotiated for a long time and eventually signed in 2017, not very happily, which meant that there was no separation and that the Financial Ombudsman Service could take any complaint. So now you have this overlap. Now you have a situation where the same complaint can be decided either on a subjective basis or on a judicial basis, and it could be a different outcome. That is very confusing and not very satisfactory. The one plus from that negotiation discussion at the time in 2016, 2017 was that the FCA agreed to signpost to my service as well as to the Financial Ombudsman Service. So I don't think it's satisfactory personally. I do think it's something that should be addressed. We have tried to address it now since then, as you know, since the tailored review, in that I have had meetings with the chief executive and so has the interim chair, my interim chair, Caroline Rooks. And we've also set up a number of groups, but at different levels, to try and work much closer together on this. But nevertheless, it is a different approach to dealing with the same complaint.
For the
do you want to?
Yeah, it is 350,000 that is the limit on that. So you're quite right. You directed 108 cases to the Financial Services Ombudsman last year, How many did they redirect to you? Ballpark. Is it of the same order, or you're doing more than them, or what?
No, far less. I think it was something like 50 cases.
The review also said that the majority of pension scheme members have little idea that there's an ombudsman to help, let alone two, and therefore rely on pension providers to guide them. Is that fair? Is that a fair criticism?
Well, I don't think it's really that fair, because there is, of course, a lot of signposting. There's signposting with every scheme. So if someone has an issue, it's in their booklet, in their pension booklets for a start, because a lot of people don't look at those booklets, but it's in the booklets. It's also, it should be in the reports issued by the pensions, for various pension schemes. In addition to that, as soon as they complain to the particular scheme that they belong to, they are then told that there is, if it's an occupational scheme, they will be told that they can make a complaint to my office. And if it's a personal pension scheme, then they are directed to report it to the FCA, or they can report to the FCA. They must report to the FCA, actually, if they're going to complain to any ombudsman, but they can also report to my office as well. So there is the signposting there. In addition, of course, they would only have to Google or look at, obviously our finances are limited. We can't have a massive advertising campaign, but we are, clearly on Google and the websites, and they can find us. And once they find us, they can find the information. So the schemes signpost, we signpost online. So in a way, today, it shouldn't be too difficult for someone to work out that they can go to one or other or both ombudsmen. By the way, I should say that if they go to me and I start the investigation, the financial ombudsman won't take they can't then go to the financial ombudsman service. They'll refuse to take the complaint, and vice versa.
Right. One of the recommendations of the tailored review is that the Department of Work and Pensions should provide greater support and challenge to you. Do you want them breathing down your neck? What's in it for you?
Well, I purposely, when I took over, I do believe in building a good relationship with everyone. So I purposely, I have meetings at all levels to DWP regularly. So they know exactly what I'm thinking, what I'm doing, and everything else. So I think that relationship is very important, the same as it is with the stakeholders and with the other pension bodies. So I have meetings with all these different individuals. And with DWP, we have quarterly meetings where the budget is examined. Perhaps if there are any special projects, that'll be reviewed. Our KPIs and whether we're meeting those, and we'll talk through. So that is already happening in terms of, not breathing down my neck, in terms of actually the exchange of views and ideas. On top of that, they also seconded someone to me a while back who was very useful in terms of looking at our MI and working out systems in which we could, with our limited resources, actually get much more information out of our systems. And that was very useful. I did ask for another secondment, but of course the problem for DWP at the present time is with COVID, they've had to move a lot of people across to deal with benefits and other issues. So there is a strain on their resources at the present time, but as soon as they are able to, they will lend me extra resource should I require it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Steve McCabe.
Good morning. Good morning. Morning. I just want to ask about your the kind of level of liaison with the Money and Pensions service. I notice it's in your corporate plan as something that you describe as a key deliverable. What exactly does liaising with the Money and Pension Service involve?
Well, this is very important. As soon as it was established, I met with Sir Hector Stans, the chair, and also I've had since Caroline Sharkovich was appointed after that, and I've had meetings with her as well. And we realise the importance of that relationship, because they'll get information in perhaps on scams and other issues that are affecting the members in relation to pensions. And it's very important that they know exactly how we're operating. I mean, the Norton is a good example, of course, and the way we might approach something, and also make sure the right advice. And just earlier about signposting, that signposting is on their agenda as well. If something needs to be signposted to me, they will signpost it to me. In addition, my first contact team, if it's a general inquiry regarding pensions, then it should be redirected to MAPS to deal with, unless it's something very quick that we can deal with. We don't want to put someone through another call unnecessarily. So they will deal with something straight away, but other things that are more complicated, they'll put through to MAPS. I think it's a really, really important relationship for us. I have an ex-MAPS employee who has a lot of contacts within MAPS, and he is regularly in contact with them as well. So at various levels, we are talking to each other and to see how we can help each other in terms of making sure people are properly informed regarding their pension benefits and what they should do if they have an issue.
Thank you. And I mean, I guess in terms of pension freedoms, one of the biggest worries is the lack of guidance, the fact that people make bad decisions or find themselves subjected to scams. Is there going to be any difference in terms of guidance with your relationship with the money and the Money and Pensions Service, as opposed to your previous relationship with PensionWise and the Money Advice Service?
Well, Money and Pensions Service is, as you know, a merger of those groups anyway, and they're still operating under those names for the time being as well. So my advice, my relationship before really was, in the main, was through TPAS, the Pensions Advisory Service, and Michelle Cracknell, the Chief Executive there. And I worked very closely with her in terms of the advice given, for really more so than PensionWise, because we were actually, it was very convenient. We were in the same building at the time, so it was very, very straightforward to do. But I worked very closely, and my team worked very closely with them to make sure that those over 55, and again, that's going to be a very vulnerable group going forward, of course, in terms of the scammers and others trying to get hold of that money that they can take from these schemes. It is a big concern. So that is part of the relationship with MAPS now, to make sure that the advice given, that people are really made aware that, you know, you draw down all your money to your pension scheme and it disappears. That's it. You know, your lifetime savings have gone. It's very frightening, very worrying that people are given the right advice. It's not my area. The advice for that obviously is MAPS, but working very closely with them to make sure that we can do what we can.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve. Sean Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to look a little bit at the merger of the dispute resolution work that the Pension Advisory Service used to do with the Ombudsman. So I just was wondering, as sort of a quick question, how you have noticed, what changes you have noticed with the merger of that work, and overall how you think the measure of, you know, what the measure of success of that merger is or has been.
I touched on this earlier on when I mentioned about the pension advice, when it was part of the Pensions Advisory Service. Yeah, the problem with it was being two different entities, not working the same, not working as one team. It tended to mean that cases that could have been transferred at a much earlier stage, perhaps that couldn't be resolved, needed an investigation, or perhaps needed to go through a proper determination, that was delayed considerably. By moving that team across, although when I first moved them across, I left them as they were, so they operated as they were, by working together with the rest of the team, bearing in mind we're not a large office, working together with the adjudicators and others, cases were transferred much more simply and easily, not going through two systems of filing, not going through two different systems of approach, if you like, and with the regular team catch-ups and everything else, cases were transferred in a much shorter space of time. It also gave us the opportunity to see, because it's very important, the pensions industry has worried about the completely different approach taken by the early resolution team to the Pensions Ombudsman service. And I think one of the issues mentioned in the team is that is there a clear demarcation, if you like? It's going to be. Well, that is what we put in place in terms of where we have one triage. It's just at that point, this is an early resolution case. So, for example, it's not a question of that coming into the old TPAS office and then them trying to deal with it. Now a decision is made right at the off. Yes, this is definitely one for ERT. No, this is definitely one that should go through for adjudication or some other process, perhaps straight through for determination, where it's obviously going to be contentious or it will be appealed. Those decisions are made in one place. Before, it was made by the TPAS team and then separately in different cases might go back to TPAS because now it can, whereas before it wouldn't do. It wouldn't go from my office in the past back to TPAS back to the early resolution team in TPAS. It would have stayed in one body or the other. Now that is a much, much more fluid system and approach, and therefore it's much better for the customer as a result, much more efficient. And I would say that the team coming across really, there was no worries about them. A lot of people thought there might be a problem, and bearing in mind 217 volunteers, that we are the first Ombudsman service ever to have volunteers. That was also a big challenge, or could have been a big challenge, but actually it has gone really well, and the volunteers stayed on board and just become part of the team, which is brilliant. That for me was very, very important. That saves a lot of resource when you think about it, but not only to save resource, it also to the pensions industry about the type of approach to do when you're dealing with pension disputes, and also vice versa. And this is what part of the strategy, part of the tailored review has suggested, that we actually have a strategy to deal with our volunteers, which we were doing anyway, which we're implementing in terms of using their expertise to help our adjudicators in different areas. Where for example, it's important, actuarial advice or whatever plays a part in a particular issue. Those volunteers are very important for that, because we've got actuaries, we've got lawyers, we've got all sorts of people within the volunteers. Does that help, Sean?
And that's a really comprehensive answer. I just wanted to ask one more thing, if I may, Chair, very quickly. Just in terms of, I suppose, really headline figures as well. I mean, some of the data I've seen suggests that on the whole, the cases that have been dealt with, managed and processed has been relatively steady, and your process times for dealing with adjudicating on issues is reduced slightly as well. For you, Mr. Arthur, in terms of what you would look at, if we go back to this point of measuring success, would you say that an increase in the volume of cases that you produce combined with a reduction in time frame would be that sort of ultimate goal for the organisation, would you say?
What's important for me is to make sure that we get the value for money. Obviously, we've got limited resource.
Yeah, of course.
We have an increase, as you've just pointed out, in workflow coming in all the time. I think across all the workflows, 13% from last year alone. And in parts of it were considerably more than that. So for me, it's all about, and that's why this second phase is maximising the resource we have to actually not result in a delay in that process, where we end up with backlogs building again and cases not being dealt with. So yeah, that is the measure of success, really. And also, of course, what's most important of all is the quality of the advice given and the outcome being the right outcome. That can't be missed as well. That's really, really important. Don't speed up the process then to have a poor result as the outcome. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. Debbie Abrahams wants to come in with a quick point, I think.
Thank you, Stephen. And Mr. Arthur, just following on from my colleagues, there seems to be a thread that's coming through this, that there are a number of different regulators, there are a number of different advisory services. as one of the regulators, do you feel that either individually or collectively you have the powers to be able to give justice to people who are either duped through fraud or they have an employer who take the, doesn't invest their money into their pension? Do you have all the requisite powers to get justice for them?
Well, I want to just correct you. I'm not a regulator. It's a very different between the FSA and the pensions regulator. They regulate on the basis of the regulations that are in place. And I report a respondent to the regulator. If, for example, I'll give you an example, if they haven't paid the contributions for auto enrolment, I will direct that they be repaid with interest possibly, or if they've lost investment or whatever. I will recompense the member through my directions, but I will report the respondent to the regulator for the regulator to decide whether they're going to fine or take other action against the individual. So there's a difference between the Ombudsman service dealing with a dispute and a complaint and the regulatory matters that are dealt with by the pensions regulator and the FCA. Okay. So it is complicated in that we have two regulators, as you know, and there is a division, if you like, on different types of regulations and how they interplay. They work very closely together. And there is a difference. There is a problem, as I highlighted earlier, in the overlap between the Ombudsman services and the different approach taken to those. I've already hinted earlier that I would have liked the Ombudsman side, the dispute side, to be much clearer for the public. I do think it's a model for the public. I think it's a shame. I realise that these things can't be dealt with overnight and they can't be changed very easily, but I do think there's an issue there.
Okay, and just very briefly then, does it make it more difficult for you to do your job to dispense justice if because of that lack of clarity?
I have considerable power, I have to say. I have to act within the law, which is right. So at the moment, there are things that I would like changed to be able to take action in some other cases. But on the whole, I've got more power than any other ombudsman actually, because the awards I make are unlimited. That's important. And also, I bind both parties. No other ombudsman in the UK binds both parties. So the Parliament did give me considerable power. The only other ombudsman service is in Ireland, where the financial ombudsman in Ireland has the same powers as me. It's the only other ombudsman I'm aware of that has the same powers. So I have a lot of power, actually, David.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ben Spencer.
I'd like to ask a few questions about customer experience, if I may. And I use the word customer experience because it's the term that's used in your corporate strategy to describe people who come to you with an issue that needs resolution. What do people think of your service? What do your customers make of the service once they've gone through the process?
Well, we're just about to change the way in which we measure this. It hasn't been very well measured in the past. What we're going to do going forward, and of course it's all resource. We've changed our website for a start. The website on 28th of May has changed, so it's far more user friendly. The other thing about the service that we are providing is that from August we're having a portal whereby the customer can log in at any point to find exactly where their complaint is in the process and what's happening with it, which is good for the individual customer, but also good from our point of view, from a resource point of view. We had, I think the number of complaints we had were 1% of our service last year. I think that's pretty low. And the complaints often amount to the fact that someone hasn't got the outcome that they wanted to get. You'd expect that, which is why we have to measure it in a different way. We're going to measure our service in terms of satisfaction from the point of view of how is the service right the way through. So application, the investigation, and not just at the end. The way it used to be measured was at the end, when someone perhaps hadn't got the outcome they wanted, and then they'll say, well, the service was lousy because they didn't agree with me, or whatever. Or if they got the outcome, then it was fantastic service. So it is a question of measuring the service and the provision of the service in the right way. And I'm very keen, now we've got our quality assurance team in place, to measure the service they're providing at each stage, right the way through that process. So I also set up a consumer forum. That consists of people like Which, the unions and others, in order to input into the service they believe we're providing, to make sure that if there are issues, that they see issues, that we're addressing those. That for me was just as important as the key stakeholders, if you like, the big schemes and so forth, because it's a way of capturing the customer right across the board. We're impartial, and we want to make sure that we're providing that service for all sides.
What you're planning on doing, I mean, have you got any data historically in terms of how things have been prior to implementing this, and how quickly do you anticipate the changes we brought in so that you can act on what you're getting?
The changes are bringing in this financial year. The satisfaction was around 60%, so it's not high enough, and I think that's because we measured it at the end when people's results, when they got their results. And that's why we're changing the process.
Do you think it's easy for people to navigate the system? I mean, I have to say my head's hurting a bit as I'm understanding how you even get to the point where you're starting to raise an issue of the Ombudsman in terms of the tensions between which one to go to and how to process it. But once, let's say, you've got someone who's registered with you, going through that, how easy do you think it is for somebody to navigate it?
Well, this is why it's very important. Part of the reorganisation that we've now implemented is to have some people within my organisation. If someone is suffering from some a disability or language issue or some way in which they can't understand what is going on, they will personally help them through that process. I think that's really important, because, you know, just for the ordinary person without any issues at all, pensions are really complicated. We have the introduction to the process is now made much more simple on the new website. I don't know if you looked at the new website yet. It's been up and running since 28th of May. And the online application, again, this is all part and parcel of this latest digitalisation program that we've got, will be intelligent. So it'll take the person through an application. And this is why, you know, you talk about the process, it is complicated. This is why I wanted the public sector schemes and other schemes to go to a one-stage process. So it's a much more simple process of complaint, rather than going through several stages and several different ways of going through a complaint. And also the it's time consuming, but unnecessary, because there are so many appeal processes, you know. So for me, I absolutely agree. We've got to try and make it as simple as possible, and that's what I've attempted to do with the resources I've got, and hopefully with this new approach this year, it will be much simpler again. But absolutely key for my successor as well, will be to constantly look at ways in which we can simplify the process for individuals who have got a pensions problem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nigel Mills.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Otter, you said your complaints are up by around 30% on last year. Could you just talk us through what the trends are, what sort of areas of increase that you're seeing?
Transfers are now the top percentage, 23%, 23.6%.
Can I just interject? Was it 13% increase or 30% increase since last year?
13, yeah. 13% across all workflows. But if you take inquiries, for example, inquiries alone have gone up 41%. So early resolution cases have gone up 23%. So some areas have gone up considerably from other areas, but overall, all workflow 13%.
And do you, in all those cases, do you feel you've got the right powers that you need to get the complaint resolved, or do you at times feel you can find in favour of the complainant, but there's no real action that happens after that?
Well, we have a system, the present system in place is that a person, if there's no reaction and no one takes any action on it, then of course they can go to, as I mentioned earlier on, they go to the county court for my determination to be enforced, and that will be enforced. There is no doubt about it. There is no appeal from that. It will be enforced. So if, for example, I mean, it is complicated looking at different types of investigation. If you take an ill health case where there's the discretion being exercised by the trustees in a particular case, or it might be a death benefit where they've used their discretion to pay certain individuals, I can't interfere with that discretion unless it's perverse. So in a case like that, I would normally send it back to the trustees or the pension body, public sector, to the pension body to reconsider their decision and the reasons why I'm directing they reconsider their decision. If it then comes back again, when they haven't taken into account what I've said, I can make my own decision on that matter, but it's quite prolonged. It's quite a long process. I would usually hold an oral hearing in that case to give the trustees or the body the chance to actually explain why they haven't changed it. That is a proper judicial process before I finally make a decision in place of the trustees. And I have done that. But it is a longer process.
You're not asking the department to give you new or different powers. You don't sit there frustrated that you can't resolve certain things that you'd like to be able to. Yeah,
I would like to take a complaint from an employer, for example, where they've got problems with the administrator, but the complaint at the present time has to come through a member and not an employer. If you take auto-enrollment as another example, where they might have problems with the scheme or the providers for the auto-enrollment or the administrators, it would be quite nice to be able to take a complaint from the employer on behalf of the members that actually this is not operating properly. There's an example.
That would seem to make sense, because you obviously would have the problem with members not being that engaged, so they probably wouldn't know there was a problem. But it's probably not too hard to tee up one member to complain if you really were worried about it. I think you've talked earlier on about how you liaise well with all the other relevant bodies, but do you try and spot trends and emerging problems and try and feed them on so they can get a system-wide resolution, or is that not part of your role?
No, we do talk about trends, and we've also set up, I mean, talk a lot about auto-enrollment. We've set up between my office and the regulator, a group to watch on what's happening with auto-enrollment, so that they can feed their information intelligence in, and I can as well, to make sure we're keeping on top of that. That's really important going forward.
Okay, and then I think we've talked a fair bit about scams. I mean, what percentage of your work is scam related? Is it a large part of it? It's
within the transfers that I mentioned, that 23.6%. It's quite small, actually. I mean, funnily enough, in about 2015, 2016, it was growing all the time. Then we had the cold calling legislation that came in as a result, actually, of one of my determinations, the Hughes case. And we had the cold calling legislation, which it then dropped off. That doesn't mean to say it's not going on, of course. We know it is. So it's quite a small percentage at the present time of my cases. It's probably less than 10%, actually.
And do you sometimes, when you see scam cases, do you wish the trustees had had more discretion to refuse the transfer? Similarly, at some point, the person whose pension it is, it can make decisions about their own money. But do you kind of think, how did the trustees not realise there was a problem here, and perhaps the solution would have been for them to either have to slow it down or just say, no, that's a crazy idea, we're not doing it?
As you probably, if you looked at my cases, you know, I look at this very, very carefully in terms of, have the trustees gone through a proper process? Have they followed the Scorpion guidelines? And I made a decision after an oral hearing a while back where I upheld the complaint, and they had to put the money back into the scheme, the individual back into the scheme, because they hadn't followed the proper process. I think the trustees have to be very careful because they have to transfer, as you know, the statutory transfer. There are guidelines on times and everything else, and they go through a proper process. I think it's one of those areas which they really have to follow very carefully the process, because on the one hand, you've got to say, are there freedoms for the individual to do what they want, or is there no freedom? And does the scheme make all the decisions for the individual? And it's that balance between freedom for the individual to make a decision and make a sensible decision and be properly warned and go through a process, but at the end of the day, it's their decision. Or does the trustee have the power to say, no, you can't transfer? And I think that's quite a difficult balance. I mean, what you're saying, I think, is, can there be an extra time given perhaps to this? And maybe that is a halfway house. Maybe that's worth looking at from the point of view of giving further time. But ultimately, do you refuse someone a transfer because you're not happy with it and the trustee makes that decision on behalf of the member? Or do you allow the member the freedom to throw their money away, having been warned and everything else and told, this is very silly? I mean, it's a bit like, investing in something where they're going to make 100% in a year or whatever. At the end of the day, do you say to the person, no, you can't do that because you're going to hold their money? So I think there's a balance between freedom and a balance between making sure people are properly informed and the trustees are protected when they are concerned about something. And it's getting that balance right that's very important.
Okay, thank you. That's a pretty fair summary. There's just one further issue, is that's one frustration our constituents have, is I think you have a 3-year time limit. People have to make the complaint to you within 3 years. Have you got any views on whether 3 years is the right time, or whether we should increase that just to allow complainants a bit more time? It can be, things can be quite complex, and it can be a while before they realise that something went wrong, and by the time they work out what to do about it, time has gone away. Any thoughts on whether it should be 5 years or perhaps longer?
Well, if they don't realise that something has happened, then the time doesn't start until they realise. It doesn't start from the incident occurring, only if it was obvious to them right at the outset. So the time doesn't start to go from there. Because I'm a judicial body, I'm very much limited to the court's powers in this respect, especially if it's a matter that can be dealt with alternatively by the courts. There is a case which dealt with this, actually, Arjo Wiggins, some years ago, which the High Court, the courts clearly said that my discretion in terms of my time limits can't be different from that of the courts, because it's exactly the same matter that could be dealt with by a court, and it would be wrong for me to have a different time limit. I have got more flexibility than a court's got, however, because if someone, for a very good reason, isn't able to take action, say they were ill or they have a mental illness or some other problem, and they can't take action for some reason, I can use my discretion to allow an increase over the 3 years. I have to be careful how I use that. There has to be very good reason, justifiable reasons for it, but I have got that power. So it's only a very small percentage, actually, that are refused because they're out of time. And I think the point about it is, if a person doesn't realise there's something that's happened here, the time doesn't start until they do. So I think personally, I'm happy with the time.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel, very much. Selene Saxby.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Arter. I was wanting to ask some questions around staffing, and in particular, why has there been such a significant increase in staff over the last few years, and do you expect that to continue?
Yes, well, it's really, really, really important to have that increase in staff. We would not have been able to cope with the massive increase in complaints that we've had over this period of time. It actually has gone from about 40 when I took over to just over 100 at the present time. But when you think that our workflows, I mean, inquiries alone have gone up 5-fold. The number of investigations has gone up 3 times that amount. In addition to that, when I took over, we didn't have a quality assurance team. There was no one checking on the quality of the output or the quality of the advice given or the process. We now have that in place. So a lot of that staff is not just about adjudicators, it's also about providing the infrastructure for the organisation that we require to make sure that we're dealing with the public and the stakeholders, for example, and others, and we have the resource to do that. Plus the legal team. These are very complicated legal issues, many of which are grey areas of the law, and you need a reasonable legal team, reasonable size legal team, which to do that. So we've increased the size of our legal team. So for me, it was very important to get that increase. I don't see it increasing at the same rate going forward, unless, of course, we have an absolutely avalanche of complaints. And then the decision has to be made by government about whether you give more resource to make sure those complaints are being dealt with in the right way, or whether the service actually deteriorates, and that is a consequence of the financial situation we're in. I think that's a decision for government, but I don't anticipate the increase carrying at the same rate, unless, of course, the complaints grow exponentially.
Thank you for that. And within that, you mentioned that it was related to the increase in the number of complaints. So my next question was around, do you think that a previous lack of staff limited the role of the Pensions Ombudsman and that what they were able to do? Or do you think, have you already answered that by saying because you didn't have as many complaints, they didn't need as many staff?
No, I do think they needed more staff. Again, in 2015, I took on some temporary staff as well to try and deal with that backlog on a temporary basis. They didn't have sufficient staff to deal with the workflow, but also they didn't have the infrastructure that I really thought was necessary in order to provide the support. You don't just need adjudicators. You need to have this quality control, which I was very insistent on. You need to have good systems in place and people to operate those, IT and other things. So you do need more people across the board to run a professional organisation such as the Pensions Ombudsman Service. So I did think that the service was lacking in numbers when I joined. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And have investigation times reduced as a result of having additional staff?
Absolutely. I think I mentioned before that a case for completion when I joined was around 10 months. Now it's 5.3 months for an investigation, and it's 3.9 months for an early resolution decision.
Fantastic. And the tailored review said, any organisation should be very proud of landing this breadth of change whilst improving core delivery performance and maintaining strong staff survey scores. Have you been sharing your experience with other public bodies?
Well, funnily enough, I had a senior leaders forum meeting at DWP a couple of months back, and Nest, for example, immediately said that they really liked the approach we're taking on agile working and wanted to understand how we operated that and how we worked it. And I am sharing it with other ombudsman bodies as chair of the Ombudsman Association. So yes, indeed. I think it's important that, of course, it's slightly different now because of COVID. Many organisations have actually had to change their approach as a result and bring in these systems. But we have shared it with others, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Selene. Can I just finally, Mr. Otter, ask you, you've made a number of references to your successor, the challenges your successor is likely to face. You've got a final year of your term. Do we know at this stage what the process and time scale for appointing your successor is going to be?
I haven't been told, no. I presume it'll probably many months before the actual date, next 31st July, because as we know, it's a long process. I would have thought it would be later on this year, the autumn maybe.
It would begin, yeah.
Start the process would be my guess, but I haven't.
No. Fine. Okay. Well, thank you very much. That brings our questions to an end. Thank you very much for giving us such clear and full answers to all of those questions, and we wish you well for your work in the year and a bit that remains. Thank you, everybody. Order.
Ended.